of my mantras in marketing was give until it hurts. I don't want to put out anything that's just fluff. I want to put out things that are going to add value to the ecosystem. And yes, do people take that and go off and work on their own? They do, but ultimately they remember who got them there. And if they ever do need help, they come knocking.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. We're your hosts, Brendan Denewell
and Amy Weaver.
Well, Jim, thanks again so much for joining us today. I'm going to kick right off by just letting the audience know a little bit about you, and then we'll fill in some of the blanks as we go and after. One of the many reasons I'm so excited to have you on the RevOps Champions podcast is you built the number one Microsoft Dynamics CRM partner globally. Our goal at Dynamico is to build the number one HubSpot partner globally. And I knew from the moment that we met that I could learn a lot, and we could learn a lot from you. And the very first conversation that we had a little over a year ago, you shared two things with me that I want to make sure we can dig in a little bit more, that really stood out to me. And the one was focus. And well, I think the way you said it, and I think the way you actually said it is that the top three most important things are focus, and focus. And then the other thing that you shared, because I mean you built an incredibly successful business, not that different to ours, on the four pillars, over let's say roughly a 15-year period. And the four pillars are service, support, education, and add-ons. So I'd like to sort of dig a little more into those, and then at a later stage, sort of talk a little bit about how you've transitioned out of that B2B technology services business into what you're doing now with Wydaho, which is a completely different business and super exciting because, of course, I've seen it firsthand. So. Let's start with the focus and the four pillars. How do you explain more the importance of focus to you in scaling a business successfully?
Yeah, so it helps to step back a little bit and see where I landed on what I call fanatical focus. I think that's how I typically describe it. When I got into Power Team, and it was the early version of what PowerObjects became, we were an IT service provider. That's a pretty general term, and the services that we offered were relatively general. And we did websites, we did app development, we did client server development. If it touched a computer and we could bill an hour's worth of time for it, that was revenue that we chased.
What year was that, Jim? That
would have been back in 2001. So it was just a few months before 9/11, and that's how I always remember that, because we sort of came in and we were doing in those days it was a bunch of Power Builder client server work. We were doing some web development. We had some web hosting, but then 9/11 happened, and what few contracts and projects we had dried up overnight. Everyone just sort of stopped spending money and wanted to see what was going to happen post. But we came back and we really continued on that path for a number of years of just being a generalist and doing whatever we could bill for. And how I like to describe it is it's like a circus act where you've got somebody there spinning a plate on top of a pole. And, I'd be over here spinning this one, and then we'd go set up this pole. We'd be spinning this one, and they all start wobbling. And pretty soon it's not scalable because you can't run around and keep all the plates spinning. It just becomes unmanageable. And about that time, I was part of the entrepreneurs organization in the Twin Cities, and a friend of mine was getting involved in what has now become a pretty big organization called EOS. Back in that day, there was maybe 2 companies using EOS. Traction hadn't been written yet, and it was.
And Minneapolis is like the mecca for it.
It is, and I would like to say we're a large impetus of that explosion, because we gave the first implementer in town some of his early successes with getting some clients, which helps. But one of the things that they talk about in EOS, and it's talked about in other books, it's not just EOS, but it's having that focus. What is that driving thing for the business? What do you do? We had to sit down as a team and really look at everything we were doing and decide what did we want to look like going forward, and what was that one thing we were going to grab onto. And we had, we were a few $1 million at that point, but had only done a couple $100,000 in Dynamics prior to that, and really, as a team, sat down and decided that was going to be the path forward. And it was this defining moment. I remember the offsite meeting where we had it, because we went in, knowing we were going to talk about this, and we made the decision as a team and all walked out that day that Dynamics going forward was the only thing we were going to sell. And we had a big, I don't know, it probably had about $750,000 left on this one contract. That was our runway to retool the organization and get enough of this sold so that we could keep everybody employed. But that was.
And what was the size of the organization at that time?
Probably 20 people.
Okay.
It was not big. But most of them were Power Builder consultants. Some were web developers. Some did infrastructure stuff. Our main sales guy sold Sybase tools, because we were implementing Power Builder and selling Sybase databases. And I think Sybase, our early partnership with them was probably one of the things that pushed us to Microsoft. They were so horrible to partner with, that all of a sudden we had this organization that was sort of partner led and really valued what partners had to say and what we were doing. That it was sort of a breath of fresh air. And I was like, well, if we're going to partner with some major tech company at that time, this looks like a good one. Let's go for it. So that was a long answer to focus. But we came out of that meeting saying that Microsoft Dynamics was the only thing we were doing, and getting that clarity made our everything easier. It's not easy to grow a business, but it creates this momentum behind something. Your marketing processes, your sales processes, your delivery processes, everything revolved around Microsoft Dynamics. And that was a real turning point. That was probably 06, 07 timeframe, I'm thinking.
Yeah. And Jim, so once you'd made that decision to focus on Microsoft Dynamics, and was there anything you did beyond that to specialize even further, to become even more focused?
Well, Dynamics at the time was a collection of ERP products. They had bought GP, they had bought Solomon, they had bought Navision, and they had grown from the ground up this CRM product. We saw CRM very early on as not just a sales and marketing tool, but back in the day, we called it XRM, so variable relationship management, where we could build out any business process on top of this platform and really model it and give a company the tools to do what they were going to do. And with our background in app development and client server development and 3-tier development, mostly with Sybase tools, that made a lot of sense to us. So we said, we're going to focus even beyond Dynamics. We're going to focus just in the CRM, XRM product set. That's really where the 4 pillars came around. We said, well, if we're going to set that at the center of what we do, how do we surround this and monetize anything that could happen with that at the center? And that's where our service, support, education, and add-ons came from. Services was, always a large portion of our revenue. We were consultants billing time, turning time into money. And we always wanted to take projects and turn more time into money. You're always trying to grow your projects. So how can we make customers successful with that, which would then result in them spending more money with us? And that's where, the support organization came out of, the education organization, and all of our add-ons and apps that we developed.
So you would have teams dedicated to each of those pillars.
Some people were dedicated to a pillar. That's what the organization was dedicated to, the service, support, education, and add-ons. Now, I had a team that, just did education and training. Most of them came out of consulting. We had a team that just developed add-ons. But if we had a hardcore project where we needed some, heavy duty coding, would we beg or borrow from the development team? Sure. So no one, when you're growing a company, you're always wearing multiple hats. No one's completely dedicated. But by and large, the largest part of the organization was the service component, and we grew the support organization over time.
Yeah, and that's actually what I wanted to clarify, but you already mentioned. So in the HubSpot ecosystem, when we talk about education, it's really more around like, what is the thought leadership and content you're putting out into the world to help folks educate themselves. And then of course for us the training is separate. So I'm glad you clarified that, because one of the things that we've seen, of course, is that for a successful implementation and or integration, the training component is so critical to the adoption of the implementation. And I'm guessing is that how your sort of education pillar came about?
The education pillar came about because initially we were selling training. So it really started with training. As that evolved, the adoption and change management practice also lived within education. So there was a few components to that, but it started off with classes that we were selling. I would really say that first part that you talked about as education really lived within our marketing organization. One of my mantras in marketing was give until it hurts. I don't want to put out anything that's just fluff. I want to put out things that are going to add value to the ecosystem. And yes, do people take that and go off and work on their own? They do, but ultimately they remember who got them there, and if they ever do need help, they come knocking. So we had a blog engine that was sort of run by the whole organization. We had scorecard metrics around how many blogs you were producing. It was all funneled into marketing, and they had to put these out, so that we could educate the world on how to use Dynamics or what XRM was. And it wasn't just thinly veiled marketing materials. This was, there was code source, there was code out there. We really put in, things that added value. And it turns out that's what really ranks on the search engines, because people run into the same problems that we would run into with our clients that we had written a blog on. They go search for how do I do blah. Boom, there's PowerObjects blog, number one ranked. And they get there and it's like, what else do they do? And, in our heyday, we had more traffic around Dynamics CRM on our website than Microsoft did, just because there was so much valuable information to educate the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you were even though you maybe weren't calling it that, you were doing inbound marketing, or maybe you were calling that, but of course, in the HubSpot ecosystem, inbound marketing, of course, is where they kind of started, and where we started as a company, and then evolved into the CRM space, as the HubSpot product became more powerful and added the sales and customer service functionality.
Oh yeah, we were always sort of watching how they were. HubSpot was definitely a leg up in the whole market. Marketing was probably the weakest pillar in Dynamics back in those days. So we were always looking at, what HubSpot or others were trying to do on converting traffic. How do we convert traffic? Because you get them to the blog and you're educating them, but how do I get them to click? How do I get them to turn over personal, So yeah, we had a bunch of add-ons that facilitated that and augmented the data inside Dynamics.
So Jim, tell us a little more about the add-ons. Explain a little bit more about what that means or meant to you then.
Yeah, the Dynamics platform was really extensible, so you could, and I'm not a coder, so I'll probably say things incorrectly, but there were open APIs into the Dynamics, and you could write pieces of code that you would set alongside your cloud instance of Dynamics that would do something. We were always looking to do something that multiple clients were trying to solve. Maybe the view that the data comes out of the box in is not quite how they wanted it. They wanted more of a sortable grid that was clickable. So let's build a framework that's an add-on and put that together and then make that available to the world. So if more than 2 people were looking for it, hundreds of people were looking for it. So we tried to solve the repeatable problems that I called white space in the product, knowing full well that it was all disposable. We were very clear that we were a professional services organization. We were not an ISV, an integrated system vendor, though we sold more software that wrote on top of Dynamics than any other partner out there. That was not our business. I always said that the add-ons were disposable because ultimately, especially online platforms or cloud-based platforms, evolve so quickly because you don't have to ship a disk and get someone to install it on their desktop. I mean, you make the change in the cloud and boom, it's done. So all of the add-ons, which I call disposable, ultimately probably mostly got replaced if they wanted to. One of our biggest one was a Power MailChimp. It was a direct tie-in to MailChimp, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But Microsoft wasn't going to write that because they have their own mail engines. But a lot of our clients were using MailChimp, and they wanted to track that data from Dynamics or from MailChimp back into Dynamics so you can do what you do in marketing and segment and do that. So we wrote it. Probably our number one selling add-on
was the MailChimp integration. Yeah, which is actually interesting. Like as you're speaking, the parallels between the Microsoft Dynamics ecosystem and the HubSpot ecosystem, with HubSpot probably being 10 to 15 years sort of behind, and of course just the advancement of technology, being what it is. So HubSpot now, for example, integrates with over 1,000 different apps that have been built by hundreds of different players building these add-ons, and there are at least a dozen, maybe 2 dozen HubSpot partners, for example, who they really got themselves on the map by building one integration between, for example, HubSpot and NetSuite, or HubSpot plus something else. But I do agree with you, and that's something we're always looking at, because like with our clients, there's always something that they need to integrate with that's critical to their business. And but now you have so many different ways to do that where you don't actually need to custom develop those things. So again, that whole world has changed about how quickly you can do an integration, just because of the sheer time and the advancement and evolution of technology.
Yeah.
But I would say that there's still again, the framework is still the same. It's just how you approach it is different.
And some of it's integration, some of it's functionality enhancements, some of it's it was just making the product better. That's what the whole add-on component was. And remembering our stated goal was to drive everything back to services, because we were a professional services organization. But we really turned the ecosystem upside down with how we price this, because we price things at $1 a month per user, which was sort of unheard of. They were like, how can you do that? You're not going to make money. It's like, well, the purpose on this piece of our business is not to make a lot of money. It's to, again, bring people into the PowerObjects ecosystem and funnel them back so we get the next project.
Have those opportunities for the services.
Yeah. And
a loss leader, if you will.
Yeah. It turned out we did make a bunch of money because there were so many seats, and there were some of our add-ons that you just had to have. And it's like,
yeah,
what's $20 a month? Well, times 1,000 companies, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you just sort of glanced over something there, Jim, which I think is really what it's about when you think about it, is the add-ons just made the overall product better. In other words, so you were trying to solve for the customer, right? So what did you need to do for their total product? In other words, their total implementation, their total CRM platform to be better. And wherever there was a gap from a technology perspective, you built an add-on so that their overall experience and product was better. And I think that's probably where it stemmed from. The fact that it became lucrative is great, but that was not where you started doing it. Was just how do we add value to our existing clients by filling in the gaps in the technology between all their different products, and knowing that if you solved it for one, there were probably going to be hundreds of other customers or businesses who would need the same add-on / integration, right? Yeah.
And it was, back in those days, the only two competing vendors was Dynamics and Salesforce. We were in a constant battle there. If we were in a deal and Salesforce wasn't there, somebody was doing something wrong. But in a lot of ways, that was the one thing that Salesforce did better, was to build out a better ecosystem of ISV partner type people. And Microsoft was very successful. They just they didn't embrace that the same way that Salesforce did. And I don't know if they ever have. I would say it was also the downfall of the Windows Phone. Windows Phone was a superior OS, superior interface, but they didn't have the ecosystem of apps and partners putting things on it, so it just died. Yeah. But Dynamics did a little better than that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and of course, with all the stuff that they're doing with Copilot now, of course, that's also potentially a game changer. So, Jim, I'd like to sort of now fast forward. So, PowerObjects was extremely successful. We've talked about some of the key elements from your perspective of why PowerObjects was so successful. But let's jump to where you are now. And I'd love to sort of get your perspective on the differences between, growing, the number one global partner in the Microsoft Dynamics ecosystem, which is a B2B business, to what you're doing now, on the border of Wyoming and Idaho in the B2C space. Tell us a little more about what Wydaho does and what some of the differences and similarities are to how you're scaling that business essentially.
So it'll be interesting to make the connections. I probably haven't thought through that as much as I should have for this, but so Wydaho, I own a company called Wydaho Property Management with my wife. Where that started was that I had bought a number of properties out here. Where I live in the foot of the Teton Mountains is a big destination place for vacationers. We're sort of nestled between Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park, and it's people call it God's country, and it is. It's amazing. So I live in this little community, and a lot of the houses are second houses for people that they come vacation in, but then they rent the rest of the year to vacationers to make money. I ended up buying a few properties and started looking around for management companies, and realized there was no one doing it the way I would do it. I mean, I always look at business and sort of think through the processes and how I would improve it, and what does it cost? What's the value I'm getting for that cost? And I was just sort of frustrated, and I said, I'm retired. I'll start my own property management company. So we started Wydaho Property, moved all of our properties into this LLC, and started managing it through that. And it was an interesting time in the property management. There's this is terminology sort of outside the world you live in, but there's OTAs. OTAs are online travel agencies, and they've had a huge surgence. Airbnb is the number one, but you have VRBO, you have Booking.com, Marriott has one, and there's a slew of other ones. They pop up every day. Actually, Google just got into the market now too, so you can actually go and search directly on Google for rentals. So there's a bunch of people that do this. Airbnb really, well, VRBO was first, but Airbnb really made it sort of a main way of people vacationing in their travel. You go rent a home, you rent a condo instead of staying in a hotel. So when you have these cloud-based systems providing the service, all of a sudden there's all sorts of ways to hook into it and do this. So I was sort of excited because there was a slew of software partners out there doing hooks into these and making this easier to manage. And I was like, because the key to really being able to scale a property management, there's a couple keys, but one is being able to automate as much as you can. Because if I'm going to do this for other people, I've got to drive my cost to deliver the service, which is managing their property, down. And the only way I can do that is if a bunch of things are happening. Imagine if I had a property that I had out on VRBO and Booking.com and Airbnb, and someone booked a night on Airbnb, and I had to go run and quickly close that on VRBO and close that out on Booking.com. I mean, it doesn't scale. So you bring this all together in these central systems that integrate to all sorts of products, and you can really create an enterprise that looks huge with very few people. So it started with just a handful of properties we owned, and now we're 65 properties and one of the largest property management people in the valley.
Yeah. So you started picking up properties of other folks in the valley who, like as you said earlier, we're only using the property for maybe 2 or 3 months of the year, if that, and then the rest of the time they were looking for somebody who could effectively manage their property and maximize the return that they were getting on that property, right?
Yeah, and that maximizing the return for the property owners is one of the key things that with software and algorithms and stuff, you can just do much better at scale than an individual could be. Most people, if you're an individual homeowner and you decide, I'm going to do this myself, you'll put it out on Airbnb and say, this is our price per night, and let her rip. Well, you're either not taking any reservations because your price per night is outside of the market norms, or when it gets hot, they're way under the market norms, and you book all your nights, good, but you're leaving so much money on the table. So I always tell people, even we charge a 20% fee to manage a property. Said even with my 20% fee, I can guarantee you'll make more money letting me do this for you than you will, unless you go buy all the software and set it up and manage it, monitor it, and do what we do.
That's really interesting. So you're starting to talk about, because I asked you, like, what do you think of the similarities and differences between running a large B2B technology consulting business and running now a growing B2C business? And you've already said a couple of things. One is one of the things that you can use to scale either of them, of course, is technology. But we also know, and we know that technology is really only the fourth. So when we talk about this in every episode of RevOps Champions, and just the whole premise of RevOps, or whatever people call this go-to-market model in their company. Because one of the other things we know is that there's different things to call this. We had to give it a name, and RevOps is the one that makes the most sense to us, revenue operations. But it starts with aligning the people that need to do whatever the business needs to do, and then aligning the processes that you need to run a successful business, and then figuring out what the KPIs or the data are that you need to run a successful business. Once you've mapped that all out, then you start bringing in the technology and the tools, the software tools, to make that all go even better and faster, right? To drive that efficiency and drive down cost, and at the same time improve the customer experience. So that's the other thing. This trend we see in every story we hear and every person we interview. There's this trend between the two sides of the coin. You're driving efficiency through people, process, data, and technology. But as soon as you do that, the customer experience is going up as well, because it becomes a very organic process where wherever the customer is in their journey, they feel like they're getting what they want when they want it. So you've talked about the automation, similarities between the B2B and B2C businesses that you've been successful in. What other differences or similarities do you think you've experienced?
Well, you touched on processes. It all stems from having repeatable processes. If you don't have something repeatable, it's not scalable. So and then processes, and this is why it was magical being a CRM implementer, is because it's never done. As much as you'll close projects, but it's never done. As soon as you close that project, you can sit down and relook at your processes, and I guarantee you there's something that you would do different because you know more every time you go to reanalyze a process. So just with like implementing CRM, growing a business, you're constantly poking and prodding at your processes and saying, where can or should I automate these, or where shouldn't I be automating these? How much human interaction is it going to take to really keep that automation happening? And now with AI, I mean, even in the short-term rental business space, I mean, AI is just starting to come in fast and hard, from guest communications to all sorts of pieces that is going to help us automate and scale this better. So it really, but we did start with a focus, and I've had to remind, my daughter and son-in-law now work full-time in the business. My wife and I work part-time in the business, and then there's a bunch of other labor, but not management. We will have people come to us on, do we want to manage this HOA and do the HOA management? Do we want to do long-term management? But our focus is to be the number one short-term rental vacation management business in the Valley. So it always all comes back to that, because how I manage a tenant that I am trying to ensure has the best vacation that they could have while they're spending their hard-earned dollars in the Valley is different than if I had a long-term 12-month tenant that I'm trying to make sure doesn't damage stuff and pays their rent on time. I mean, it's a different business. And so many people try to do it all and then don't do anything well.
That's really interesting. And then you've also, so through the property management business, as you got to know more and more visitors to the Valley, and of course more and more owners of the properties that you're managing, it sounds like something else came up as a need.
Yeah, well, it did, because you know me and you've experienced.
Right. Well, and I was there in February and experienced the incredible. Well, it was the incredible experience. at the bakery and coffee shop, which again is just sort of would seem to be an extension from what you were seeing that visitors and residents in the valley were really needing.
Yeah, it's interesting how businesses start. And I do think some of the best businesses start by accident, or they're just started by people that are serial entrepreneurs like myself and are constantly looking for something to do. I mean, we don't people of my ilk don't sit still very well. And just to give you the story on sort of how it happened, because it wasn't planned. I mean, so many people think you put this business plan together and you go present it to all these people, and sometimes it just happens. The property management just happened because it was something I was doing, and I naturally think about how do I scale and grow something. Same thing with our coffee shop and bakery. And the way it came about is I'm a fanatical coffee person. Always have been. I've always roasted my own beans, and I'm always trying to perfect the perfect cup of coffee, and it's just how I'm wired. And one of our hooks for our properties, and so you look at, because when we travel, we'll stay in Airbnbs, and the thing that drives me the most nuts, and I solve it for myself because I bring all my own coffee and equipment, but is getting to a place and they think having a Keurig pot or worst case, I don't know. There's all sorts of bad coffee setups in rentals, and that's not going to be how Wydaho does it. I'm gonna up my roasting game, and I'm gonna start roasting enough coffee that we can stock all of the properties, so that when people come stay with us, if they're coffee drinkers, they're going to be wowed, and we're going to get 5-star. Yeah. So, and in the property management business, it's all about driving to that 5-star review. I don't care what else happens. You need that 5-star review. Because after they paid the rent, the only value the tenant has is that review. So the coffee was what we did. So, and we had bought this building that I was running, because I could talk forever about the property management and what you need to scale, but one of the things you need is a laundry facilities, because you flip so many beds and stuff. So we bought this building to set up this laundry facility, but I had all this open space, and once we got past 30 properties, I wasn't able on my home roasters to sort of keep up on my coffee roasting. So we ended up buying a big roaster, a 10 kilogram. They make them a lot bigger, but something that does 20 pounds at a time. And I was sort of excited because it's a new roaster and I love to roast. And but then we had this big room set up with just this roaster in it. And I started looking around, and I was like, if I wanted to go hang out at a coffee shop around here, there's no place really to go hang out. So I set up a coffee shop and just sort of said, I'm going to share my passion of coffee with people, and I believe that they will probably enjoy that. And if I do what other people aren't doing, provide a place, good Wi-Fi, there's plenty of boutique coffee shops around the world. I mean, it's not hard, and I'm a consumer of many. Anytime we go into a town, I search out, not Starbucks, I search out, Joe's Coffee Cup, or, I'm looking for people that roast their own coffee or doing craft coffee, because I like to talk about coffee. I like to drink it. I like to see what people are doing. And I was like, I can do this. And we don't have it in the Valley. So we set it up and had a fair amount of success, started selling a lot more beans. And then we still had room in there. And the one thing that goes really well with coffee is handcrafted pastries. And all the pastries around here were subpar. Most people were buying them from Cisco, heating them in an oven, and selling them. Nothing wrong with that if that's what you want. But if I'm going to have a croissant, I want the butter, the flake, the melt in your mouth, not a dinner roll. So my wife, who loves to cook, loves to bake, sort of popped this idea at her. I said, well, what if we do a bakery? It's like, well, I'm not sure I'm like, so I'm the eternal optimist, the entrepreneur. I'm like, we can do this. So I built out a commercial kitchen, hired some more staff, and I said, let's see what happens. and it has exploded.
Yeah, because they're so good. I mean, I was blown away.
Yeah,
when I was there in February. I mean, it's like you're not going to get anything better anywhere. I don't care if it's Italy or,
yeah,
Venice, you name it. But yeah, they're just unbelievable.
yeah. And people, when you do something to a high level of quality, people do notice, and it's created a huge loyalty in the valley for what we do. In fact, that I always joke, the coffee shops, the fastest thing I've ever grown to $1 million. I mean, it was just like overnight, boom, we're on a run rate to do $1 million this year. So now I'm looking at the other little communities around us. I'm going to take this Wydaho brand. So we turn that into, we use the Wydaho brand that we had for the property management, and then we did Wydaho Roasters Coffee House. So we're really playing off that Wydaho, and as Brendan alluded to, we're on the border of Wyoming and Idaho. That's where Wydaho comes from. And it's been fun. We just procured a food truck, a specialty coffee food truck that's actually getting branded and wrapped tomorrow. But we're going to take that out to all the festivals and events this summer and continue to expand that brand. And we'll see where it goes from there. But the focus there is really about quality and bringing a different coffee experience to people that may not have that in their backyard.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's just such a cool story. But when you sort of bring it back to the things that we're talking about and measuring on this show, you just glanced over the whole customer experience thing. I mean, that's ultimately what it's about, right? So, and also you've raised the, like, I'd say in the last 20 years, the old saying of, open your doors and they will come became like a very negative. It's like, well, clearly that doesn't happen, but you make it sound like it's actually still a possibility, but that's because you've now given us the insight into all the work and how you plan that on the back end so that people do come and you open the doors to your coffee shop and people just keep coming because you've figured out the processes, you figured out the numbers, you've automated the systems through your background in technology and apps and what have you, and then you're providing this incredible experience, and it's an experience that couldn't be better. It doesn't matter where in the world you were, and that can only be successful. So I think it's the perfect analogy of when you put in the background and you align the people, the processes, the data, because I know you measure everything too, which we haven't even talked about. But then ultimately you automate it through the technology, which is just getting better and being added to every single day. Because like I talk about it here every day too, is today is better than yesterday, and tomorrow will be better than today, because technology is making the world better every single day, and we can choose to embrace that and use it and build it into our businesses, or we can ignore it. But I prefer to embrace it.
I do gravitate towards technology and data. Just my nature of being in business and being an IT provider historically. The technology to run a coffee shop is it's not insignificant, and you can either understand the value that adds or not. And I sit in a bunch of user groups. So we run on a platform called Square. Square, and there's a few of them out there. There's Shopify, there's Square, there's Toast, there's Dripos. Your bank will have one. Everyone has one. And funny story, one of our main commercial banking relationships with US Bank, and they're always trying to, they want as much of my wallet share as they can, and they're always trying to get me to switch over to their POS. And I said, you don't get it. I said, the POS system is really the heart of a retail experience. And I don't care if I'm paying 3.5% or I'm paying 2.5% on my merchant fees. What matters to me is how well this integrates with everything else I do, from my timekeeping systems to my back-end accounting systems to whatever. That 3.5 to 2.5%, I don't care. I mean, it's that 1% differential. And I said, unless you can show me that even the experience on the checkout, I mean, Square has thought through everything from how to automate getting credit card tips to making sure that the customer can tap, do this, doesn't have, it's really interesting. And that's just technology enhancing, a food and beverage business that we're running. That's just food and beverage, but specialty coffee and handcrafted pastries.
Yeah. Well, and actually, I mean, it's interesting that you talk about Square, because, geez, I remember. I mean, I don't know how long they've been around now, but when Square first came out, it was like the first sort of mobile way to take money at a point of sale.
Yeah,
and it became huge.
Your iPhone and
yes,
and then so everyone knew what Square was. But if you think about it now, so I mean, and everybody listening, or watching this episode is they might not know about some of the technology we talk about on the B2B side and CRM and all the related tech stack, but everybody is using POS multiple times a week. But I don't even think about Square anymore because it's just become part of everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, I mean, you've just alluded to the fact that Square is way more now than it was 10 years ago, because they just kept adding more and more value to their customers to do more with that technology, and it's just become sort of ubiquitous to the user. But that's the whole point. Often customer experience should feel like you don't even realize that you've had a great experience until afterwards, because the technology has just become so much so part of the overall experience. You don't even realize it's technology anymore.
Yeah. And they do. I mean, they keep looking at, they're true to their core, which is credit card processing. So you have, or payment processing. It's not just credit card nowadays. It's Apple Pay, it's Cash Apps, it's Venmo. It's, they're true to their payment processing, but it's like, where else do they add value? And they keep finding ways to get me to pay them a little bit more a month, but I'm happy to do it when it's pieces that add value. The first thing we did was add their loyalty program, and it cost me a little bit to run it, but the data that comes back to me from this loyalty is, we started off with just a punch card,
right?
And
a lot more data than the punch card.
And it would be like, how many, and 9 punches, your 10th punch, you got a free drink. It's like, that's great. I mean, our customers loved it, but if you came to me and said, how many free drinks did we give away last month? I'd be like, unless I saved up all those cards, which, that becomes a training issue. I just don't know, our staff giving away free punches, or, what's going on here? I don't know what the value is, other than I have a happy customer, which means something, but I can't quantify it. You put in a loyalty program tied back to their purchases, the dollar amounts. I can tell you who's coming, how much they're spending, if they're spending more than non-loyalty people. And then I also get all this valuable marketing data for these customers. So my next thing was I signed up for Square Marketing, so I can market directly to my customer base. This isn't broad-based marketing. This is focused towards loyalty customers. So these are the most likely people to repurchase from us. And we have set up text-based marketing and stuff like that, and having a huge amount of success. And so, but the technology is adding value. It always has to add value. It's not to make me feel good. And it's like,
and what we've seen also is and you've reminded us again, it's when you integrate all the technology together, it becomes exponentially more valuable than just what one app or piece of technology can do, right? And in fact, so HubSpot last year, just sort of bringing things back to a more of a B2B world, they added what is now part of their 6 hubs called Commerce Hub, which essentially is a way of accepting payments for B2B businesses, and it's, I mean, I still get invoices from vendors personally, for our home type stuff every single week, where it's like the worst customer experience. I've already offered to buy something from someone, but then the whole invoicing experience is terrible. And there's no, I've either got to, it's they're not making it easy for me to decide between credit card and ACH. Whereas now, HubSpot has essentially taken that pain out of, again, but so many businesses aren't aware of something like HubSpot's Commerce Hub, where you can literally set this up in like no more than a half hour, where you can now send an invoice to a customer, and you can right there give them the option. If you want to pay by credit card, click here. If you want to pay by ACH, click here. And you could even incentivize them to pay by ACH versus credit card. But there are so many B2B businesses leaving so much money on the table, and are really starting off the customer experience terribly from the very first transaction. Like you've said, yeah, I want to buy from you, and then the invoice arrives and they make it so painful for you to actually pay them. So I guess that's, I've just come up with another similarity between what you've told us.
I think an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a overarching thing happening right now where we're talking about technology to reduce friction and to lead to these raving fans. And you did that in both of your experiences.
Yeah, we actually ran there's a whole body of knowledge around raving fans, and there's a book written about it. If you haven't read it, I forget what the name of the book is, maybe called Raving Fans, but definitely worthwhile. It sort of predated NPS kind of stuff.
Okay.
But one of the first customer-facing projects that we ran at PowerObjects was around raving fans and creating raving fans, identifying raving fans. But one of the interesting platforms, and they just sort of bubbled up onto my radar because I've been forced to interact with them a bunch recently. But when you talk about the HubSpot Commerce Platform, and so much of, especially living remote like we live now, I sort of live and die via Amazon, and just because I can get stuff, I can push a button. I really don't have to think about it, and it eventually shows up. Not like it does in the city the same day, but eventually. I always say shipping is sort of a concept out here in the Wild West. But I was wondering if anyone was ever going to sort of take them on from an e-commerce standpoint. And my last few transactions have ended up on Shop, and I don't know if you've been on Shop.
Yes, in fact, the last three things that I've purchased have all pushed me towards Shop. And to be honest, like the one was, we just bought a little on-a-counter refrigerator, a very cool little thing called the Rocco, ROCCO. But they pushed the whole shipping process through Shop, and it was a terrible experience.
It was terrible?
I'm getting I'm getting emails that I'm not even, they look like spam to me, but then I look at it and it's actually, oh no, well, AM trucking or whatever, So to me, that experience hasn't been great, but I'm very sure it'll get better.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because I was going to just use it as an example of what a wonderful experience it has been for me. So I just ordered 2 new coffee grinders for the food truck, and it went through Shop, and boom, they immediately sort of told me that it was being processed. I get little text updates on what city it's gotten to. And I just got a notification. It made me think about it because it's out for delivery. So it's going to show up today, but you can pull up and track it in Shop. But now they have my credit card information too. So like Amazon, one of the because with Amazon, you don't have to pull out your credit card and go type it in and do stuff. It's just like check out, boom, you're done. Now with Shop, I just check out, boom, I'm done. What else? I had a couple other things. So I can see them sort of going after the Amazon convenience space, and they'll differentiate on what they charge vendors to sort of sell and use through Shop, or maybe they'll turn that business model upside down like Amazon did. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I think maybe that, like, the difference between our two experiences is because they're reliant on a third-party shipper, like a trucking company, logistics business, and if the product owner has chosen the wrong shipping vendor, that's going to give you, like, my whole shop experience is going to be bad, which means when it pops up again, I'm going to go, oh, I want to use an alternative to shop because the last experience wasn't good. But I'm glad to hear you've had a good experience.
Yeah, mine's coming by UPS, so
okay,
I'm sure that's pretty well plowed ground, I hope.
Yeah, Jim. So this has been awesome. I've learned a lot, as always, when I have a conversation with you. Is there, like, we've touched on the things, but if you could leave, everybody with one, you could either repeat something or like one piece of advice from your experience, both at PowerObjects and now Wydaho, to folks listening out there who are trying to figure out, like, how do you scale a business more effectively than your, perceived competitors? What sort of advice do you have for us?
Could be a long conversation, but I'll try to be concise. So one of the things I would say is always be aware of what competitors are doing, but don't assume that they're doing it better. Go out there and plow your own ground, find out your own processes, and use the data to figure it out, but really don't be hyper focused on what everybody else is doing, because you'll I guarantee you 9 out of 10 of them aren't doing it right. So they could be bigger, they could be sexier, but it doesn't matter. Pick your battle and go. The other thing, and you and I are both advocates of the business process, and I just so wish I had stumbled on this earlier, but it didn't exist, and that was the EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It gives so much clarity to what you should be working on and what versus what you shouldn't be working on, and really focusing on those pie pieces, and do you have your data, do you have your processes, what's in the middle. I mean, it gives you such a great tool set for entrepreneurs, which tend to be ADD or very easily distractible anyway. It gives you something to sort of come back and anchor to and say, what's the most important thing for me to work on the next 30, 60, 90 days? And then I can ask that question again, what's the most important thing for me to work on next 30, 60, 90 days, instead of trying to do everything. So it really creates that focus on working on the business, because we're constantly working in the business. So
and kind of eliminating some of those distractions.
Yeah. Well, and I really love the way you actually split those into two, because your first recommendation or advice was really around more of a strategic, how do you think more strategically? And I totally agree with you that, like, spending too much time focusing on your perceived competitors, by the time you figure out what they're doing, it's going to be too late anyhow, mainly because of the velocity of technology advancement today. So I would agree that just focus on what you're doing. Obviously keep an eye, but don't do anything differently in your business because you think a competitor is doing something better or different. And then I also agree with you on bringing it down into the execution and operationalizing something using a business model, whether it's EOS or something else. I think the advice that I've seemed to have had over and over again is just find a system that works for your business and use it. You have to use some sort of operating system. EOS has been amazing for us. It was obviously amazing for you too, and many other businesses. But the point is just use something that creates that common language that you can operate the business on a daily, weekly, and 90-day cycle from an execution.
And keeps you focused on the important things.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Jim, thanks again so much. It was great to see you. I love the two stories and comparing the two stories in your your B2B, very successful B2B journey, and now your what seems to be a very successful journey with Wydaho in a more business to consumer space.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Brendan. Nice to get to know you a little bit, Amy, and
likewise.
We'll find a time to all get together and share some food or coffee.
That yeah. I look forward to that.